The ballroom sparkled that night like a dream carved out of gold. Crystal chandeliers dripped with light, violins played softly in the background, and waiters moved swiftly between tables set with white linen and silver cutlery. It was one of those grand charity galas where people came dressed to impress and spoke in polite tones about art, wealth, and success. But behind the polished laughter and shining jewelry, there were people working quietly, unseen, carrying trays, pouring champagne, clearing plates, and making sure the night ran smoothly. Lena was one of them. She had tied her hair neatly under a black cap and wore the crisp white shirt and black vest that every server had on. Her hands were slightly red from washing glasses all day, and her shoes pinched her feet, but she didn't complain. She had worked here for almost a year, taking whatever shifts she could get. The tips were good, and she needed every dollar she could make to help pay her mother's hospital bills. To her, this glittering world felt far away, almost like another planet. She had once imagined being part of something beautiful like this, not as a server, but as someone who could create beauty. There was a time not too long ago when her world revolved around music. She used to play the piano every evening after school, losing herself in melodies she wrote in secret. But life had changed quickly. When her mother got sick, the music stopped. The piano at home sat silent now, covered in dust. Still, sometimes when she thought no one could hear her, she would hum softly while working. Music had a way of slipping out of her even when she tried to hold it in. That night, the ballroom was filled with the city's richest and most powerful. The guest everyone talked about was Ethan Cole, a billionaire who had built his empire from scratch. He was young, handsome, and always at the center of attention, the kind of man who could make or break someone's night with a single comment. People laughed a little louder around him, hoping to catch his eye. He had a reputation for being charming, but also for his arrogance. He liked games, especially when they involved testing others. Lena knew who he was, though she had never spoken to him. She had seen him on magazine covers and in business news. Tonight, he sat at the largest table near the stage, surrounded by investors, celebrities, and a few people who wanted to impress him. His laughter carried through the room, confident, loud, and slightly mocking. Lena passed his table quietly, refilling glasses. She didn't look directly at him, but she could feel his presence. When she reached the end of the table, she noticed an empty glass and carefully leaned forward to pour. As she did, one of the guests made a joke, and Lena couldn't help but smile. Not because it was funny, but because her nerves made her do it automatically. Ethan noticed. "Look at her," he said with a half smile. "She's smiling like she's in on the joke. Maybe she knows something we don't." His voice was teasing, but it carried across the table. A few people chuckled politely. Lena froze for a second, then quickly shook her head. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quietly. "I didn't mean—" Ethan waved a hand. "Relax, I'm joking." He leaned back in his chair, eyeing her curiously. "You look too calm for someone working in chaos. You like this job?" Lena forced a small smile. "It's a good job, sir." "You sound like you don't believe that," he replied, grinning. A woman at the table laughed. "Careful, Ethan. You're going to make her quit mid-shift." Ethan laughed too, clearly enjoying the attention. No, I'm just curious. What would you rather be doing if not this?" Lena hesitated. She didn't want to say the truth, not in front of all these people. But something inside her, maybe pride, maybe tiredness, made her answer honestly. "I used to play piano," she said softly. "That was my dream. But now I'm just trying to take care of my family." The table went quiet for a moment. Then Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You play piano?" "A little," Lena said quickly. "Not anymore." Ethan glanced toward the grand piano on the small stage near the dance floor. It was a beautiful black instrument, shining under the soft lights, waiting for the performer who would play later. "Interesting," he said. "Tell you what, play something for us right now." Lena blinked. "Sir?" He smiled, leaning forward. "I'm serious, go on. Let's hear what you can do." A few people laughed, thinking it was another one of his jokes. But Ethan wasn't joking. His tone had that sharp edge, half amusement, half challenge. "I can't," Lena said quickly. "I'm working, and—" "I'll double your tip for the night," Ethan interrupted. "Actually, no. I'll give you a month's salary if you can play one good song." The words made a few heads turn. The music from the violins in the background faded slightly as people nearby started whispering. The idea of a billionaire daring a waitress to play the piano was unexpected. Something out of a movie. Lena's heart pounded. "I really shouldn't, sir," she said quietly. "It wouldn't be right." Ethan smiled again, that confident, teasing smile that people either admired or hated. "Come on, it's just a bit of fun. Everyone needs a moment in the spotlight." "She's shy," said another guest. "Let her be, Ethan." But Ethan wouldn't drop it. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I'm sure you can manage one song. You said you used to play, right? Let's see if you still can." Lena wanted to disappear. Every eye around the table was on her now. Some faces looked amused, others curious, and a few looked sorry for her. She thought of walking away, pretending she hadn't heard him. But then she looked at the piano again, and something stirred inside her. It had been years since she had touched one. What harm could one song do? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Just one song?" Ethan nodded. "Just one." The entire section of the room quieted as Lena placed her tray down and slowly walked toward the piano. The sound of her footsteps echoed softly against the marble floor. The guests watched, some whispering, others pulling out their phones to record what might become the evening's entertainment. The pianist, who was supposed to perform later, stood off to the side, watching curiously. The music had stopped now. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Lena's palms were sweaty and her throat felt dry. She sat on the piano bench and stared at the keys. So clean, so white they almost glowed under the lights. She took a deep breath. The last time she had played, her mother had been sitting beside her, smiling through her illness, listening to a melody Lena had written. That memory warmed her, but it also hurt. She closed her eyes and let her fingers rest gently on the keys. For a moment she forgot where she was and the crowd, the laughter, the challenge. All she could hear was the echo of her own heartbeat. She pressed the first note softly, testing. It sounded pure. She pressed another, then another, forming a small phrase. Her hands trembled slightly, but the sound grew steadier. The guests who had been whispering began to quiet down. Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, still half smiling. But there was something in his eyes, curiosity, maybe even doubt. Lena began to play a simple melody, something she remembered from her childhood. It was gentle, almost fragile, but it had a strange pull to it. The music floated across the hall, filling the empty spaces between the murmurs and laughter. For the first time that night, people stopped talking. Even the waiters paused for a moment to listen. Lena's body relaxed as her fingers moved with more confidence. The room seemed to fade away. In that moment, she wasn't a waitress or a stranger surrounded by wealth. She was just a girl who loved music. The notes carried pieces of her story, her struggles, her love for her mother, her quiet hopes. When she finished the short piece, the room stayed silent for a few seconds. Then softly at first, people began to clap. The applause grew louder, spreading across the hall like a wave. Lena stood up quickly, embarrassed, her cheeks red. She looked toward Ethan, unsure what he would say. He was clapping too, though a bit slower, watching her with a strange expression, not mockery this time, but something closer to surprise. Lena gave a small nod, whispered, "Thank you," and turned to walk back to her station. But as she picked up her tray, she could still feel his eyes on her. Something had shifted in the air, something none of them quite understood yet. When the last note faded, the sound seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have. For a few seconds, no one spoke. It was as if the room didn't quite know how to return to its rhythm after what had just happened. The music had changed something, softly, quietly, but deeply. Then came the clapping, louder this time, spreading through the crowd like a small fire catching wind. Lena stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. She wasn't used to being watched, much less applauded. Her face was red and her hands trembled slightly as she stood from the piano bench. She wanted to slip away before anyone said anything. She wasn't supposed to draw attention, not as a waitress. But when she turned, she saw Ethan still sitting there, his expression unreadable. He wasn't smiling like before. He looked thoughtful, almost lost in his own head. She gave a polite nod, then hurried back toward the service area. The applause faded behind her, replaced again by soft music from the hired band that had picked up where she left off. The other waiters glanced at her as she passed, some smiling, others whispering in disbelief. One of them quietly said, "You were amazing," and she just smiled shyly in response, pretending to focus on arranging glasses on a tray. In the main hall, Ethan sat back in his chair, his glass untouched. People around him started talking again, laughing, making comments about what they just witnessed. "I didn't expect that," one man said, shaking his head. "That girl can really play." "Yeah, that was something else," another added. "She works here, right?" Ethan didn't respond. He just stared at the piano for a moment longer. His fingers tapped lightly on the table as if still following the rhythm of the tune she'd played. It wasn't a complicated song, not like the classical pieces he'd heard performed at other events, but there was something real in it, something that didn't sound rehearsed or showy. It had come straight from somewhere inside her, and that honesty had caught him off guard. Later that night, after most of the guests had finished eating and moved on to mingling, Ethan found himself walking toward the corner of the room near the kitchen entrance. He wasn't quite sure why he was going there, maybe curiosity, maybe guilt. He saw Lena behind the counter, quietly stacking plates and wiping down a surface. She looked smaller now, away from the stage lights and applause, just another worker finishing a long shift. "You didn't tell me you could play like that," he said, leaning against the counter. Lena froze, then turned around quickly. Mr. Cole," she said. "I didn't mean to. I hope I didn't interrupt anything earlier." He shook his head. "Interrupt? You saved the evening." That was the first moment all night that people actually stopped pretending to enjoy themselves. Lena smiled faintly. "That's kind of you to say, but I just played something I remembered." Ethan looked at her curiously. "Where did you learn to play like that?" "My mom taught me," she said softly. "When I was little, we didn't have much, but she found an old piano at a thrift store once. It had a few broken keys, but she said it was enough for dreams." He nodded slowly, his expression softening. "And you stopped playing?" Lena hesitated. "Yeah, when she got sick, things got different. I had to start working. Music doesn't pay the bills, not unless you're famous." For a moment, there was silence between them. The kitchen noises faded, the clinking of dishes, the chatter of other servers. Ethan looked down at the counter, his thoughts running somewhere else. He was used to success, used to buying anything he wanted. But the idea of giving up something you love just to survive, it hit him differently. "You know," he said finally, "you shouldn't stop doing something just because life gets hard." Lena gave a tired smile. "I guess that's easy to say when you're on the other side of hard." Ethan chuckled quietly, not offended. "Fair point," he admitted. "Still, that song, it was something. You have real talent." She looked down. "It's just a song." "No," he said firmly. "It wasn't just a song." He paused. "You made everyone listen." Lena didn't know what to say to that. Compliments from men like him didn't feel real, not when they usually came with a price. But this one sounded different, sincere, maybe even surprised. She nodded politely and said, "Thank you, sir," then turned back to her work. Ethan stayed there a moment longer, watching her move efficiently through her tasks. Then he finally said, "If you ever want to play again, come by the hall in my hotel downtown. We have a grand piano there. Consider it open to you anytime." She looked at him, startled. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he replied, smiling faintly. "But I want to." He turned and walked back toward the ballroom before she could respond. She stood there for a while, not sure if he meant it or if it was just something rich people said when they felt generous. Either way, it didn't matter. She couldn't just stroll into a billionaire's hotel lobby to play piano. The thought made her laugh quietly to herself. Still, she couldn't help but feel something strange flutter in her chest, a small spark of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. As the night came to an end, Lena helped clean the hall. The chandeliers dimmed, the guests left one by one, and the once lively room turned quiet again. She glanced at the piano one last time before leaving. It looked different now, less like an untouchable piece of luxury and more like an old friend she'd almost forgotten. When she got home, the city was already asleep. Her small apartment smelled faintly of medicine and mint tea. Her mother was resting on the couch, a blanket tucked up to her chin. Lena tiptoed in and placed her earnings on the counter. Her mother stirred, opening her eyes slightly. "You're home late," she murmured. "Yeah, big event tonight," Lena whispered back. "It went okay." Her mother smiled softly. "Did you play?" she asked, her voice weak but teasing. Lena froze. "Why would you ask that?" "I know you," her mother said with a small laugh. "You never go too long without finding a piano somewhere." Lena sat beside her and smiled. Maybe I did. Just for a minute. Her mother reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. That's my girl. The next morning, Lena woke up early, her mind still replaying last night. The song, the applause, Ethan's strange expression, it all felt like a dream. She brushed it off and got ready for her next shift. But when she arrived at work, her manager stopped her near the door. There's someone waiting for you, he said, pointing toward the lobby. It was Ethan. He was dressed more casually this time, no tuxedo, no crowd around him. Just a man holding a small white envelope. I hope you don't mind me stopping by, he said with a polite smile. I wanted to give you this. Lena hesitated before taking it. What is it? Your tip, he said. You earned it. She opened it and froze. Inside was a check, not for a night's work, but enough to cover several months of her mother's treatment. She stared at it, then looked up at him in shock. I can't take this, she said immediately. It's too much. It's not charity, he replied gently. Think of it as an investment in your music. I told you I'm not a musician anymore. Maybe not right now, he said. But you could be again. Lena didn't know what to say. She wanted to refuse, to hold on to her pride. But when she thought about her mother and the bills waiting at home, her throat tightened. She nodded slowly. Thank you, Ethan smiled. Promise me something, he said. Don't stop playing. Not again. She looked at him, unsure if he really understood what he was asking. But something in his eyes told her he meant it. I'll try, she said quietly. As he turned to leave, she called after him. Mr. Cole? He looked back. Yes? Why did you dare me that night? He thought for a moment, then said, I thought it would be funny. But turns out it was the best mistake I've ever made. Lena smiled faintly. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, not as a waitress, not as someone struggling, but as a person who still had something beautiful inside her waiting to come out. And though she didn't know it yet, that one song played on a dare was only the beginning. The following week went by slower than usual. Lena's routine didn't change much. Work, home, hospital visits, but something inside her had shifted. The sound of applause still echoed in her mind every now and then, and the weight of the check Ethan had given her stayed heavy in her thoughts. She hadn't cashed it yet. It sat inside a drawer at home, next to old sheet music she hadn't looked at in years. Every time she opened that drawer, she stared at it, unsure if she should feel grateful or embarrassed. She didn't want anyone's pity. Yet deep down she knew that money could help her mother more than pride ever could. So one morning, after a long hesitation, she took the check to the bank. Her hands trembled slightly as she signed the deposit slip. It felt strange, like she was crossing some invisible line between her world and his. At the same time, Ethan was also thinking about her. He wasn't used to being curious about people he met at events. Usually they blurred together in his memory, faces, names, business cards. But something about Lena stuck with him. The quiet way she carried herself, the way she looked terrified and yet brave at the same time when she played, that image wouldn't leave his mind. He told himself it was just curiosity, maybe guilt for embarrassing her in front of everyone. But the truth was he respected her. That was new to him. Most people around him wanted something. Deals, attention, connections. She didn't. She just wanted to survive, and that honesty felt rare. A few days later, he sent someone from his office to drop off an envelope at her workplace. Inside was a simple note. Saturday, 6 p.m., Hotel Cole Music Hall, don't say no. There was no signature, but she knew who it was from. She almost laughed when she read it. Don't say no meant as if she had any reason to go. For 2 days she debated. She told herself it was silly to even consider it. He was rich, powerful, and unpredictable. What could he possibly want from a waitress who played piano once? But another voice whispered that maybe it wasn't about wanting anything. Maybe he just meant what he said, that she should play again. Saturday evening came, and after finishing her shift, Lena found herself walking toward the hotel. She almost turned around twice. The place was stunning, towering glass walls, marble floors, and a fountain in the lobby that sparkled under the lights. She felt out of place immediately. When she reached the front desk, a kind-looking receptionist smiled and said, "You must be Lena. Mr. Cole is expecting you." Her name sounded strange in that setting. The receptionist guided her to a private music hall on the second floor. It was empty, except for a grand piano standing under soft golden lights. Ethan was there, leaning casually against the wall. No suit this time, just a simple shirt and jeans. He looked almost ordinary, which somehow made him more intimidating. "You came," he said, smiling slightly. "I wasn't sure I should," she admitted. "I thought maybe it was some kind of joke." "I don't joke twice about the same thing," he replied lightly. "I meant it when I said you could play here." She looked around the empty hall. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "But I don't belong in places like this." Ethan shook his head. "You belong wherever your talent takes you. Sit down. Play something." Lena hesitated, then slowly approached the piano. Her reflection shimmered faintly on its polished surface. She sat, took a deep breath, and let her fingers find the keys. The sound that filled the room was soft at first, uncertain, like a shy voice finding its words. Ethan didn't interrupt. He just listened. As the song unfolded, he closed his eyes. The melody wasn't perfect, some notes came out too loud, others too quiet, but it had heart. When she stopped, there was a long silence. Then he said quietly, "You play like you mean every note." Lena looked down, embarrassed. "That's the only way I know how." He smiled faintly. "Good. That's what makes real music." They talked for a while after that. He asked about her life, her mother, her old piano at home. She didn't tell him much, only what she was comfortable sharing. He didn't press her for more. For once, he just listened. He told her a little about his own life, too. How he'd grown up poor. How success had come at a cost he hadn't expected. It surprised her. She had never thought of people like him as having struggles of their own. "Money solves problems," he said, "but it doesn't solve people." She smiled. "You sound like someone who's learned that the hard way." "Maybe," he said softly. When she stood to leave, Ethan said, "Come back next week." "Same time. Why?" she asked, confused. "Because you need to keep playing," he said simply. "You stopped once. Don't do it again." She nodded, unsure what else to say, and left the hall. As she walked through the quiet lobby, something about the night felt unreal. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. From then on, every Saturday became their quiet ritual. She'd finish her shift, walk to the hotel, and play for an hour or two. Sometimes Ethan listened. Other times he just sat nearby, working on his laptop or talking to someone on the phone. But he was always there, always listening in some way. Slowly, Lena's confidence returned. Her fingers found old melodies she thought she'd forgotten. She even started composing again, small, gentle tunes that carried pieces of her story. One evening, as she finished playing a new song, Ethan said, "That one's different." "What's it called?" She thought for a moment. "Hope," she said. "It's for my mom." He nodded, clearly moved. "It's beautiful." "You should record it," she laughed softly. "With what studio?" He smiled. "Leave that to me." Within a week, Ethan arranged for her to visit a small recording studio downtown. It wasn't a fancy place, but it was enough to capture her music properly. When she stepped into the soundproof room and saw the piano waiting for her, her hands shook. It had been years since she'd been in a space like that. The sound engineer smiled warmly and said, "Take your time. We'll start whenever you're ready." She played 3 pieces that night, each one carrying something personal. When she finished, Ethan listened to the recordings with quiet satisfaction. "You realize," he said, "that people need to hear this, right?" "I'm not ready for that," she said quickly. "I don't want attention." "Then don't think about them," he said. "Just think about the music." Weeks passed, and slowly her songs began to reach people. Ethan had quietly uploaded one of her recordings online through a charity music page. Within days, comments started pouring in, people talking about how the song made them feel calm, hopeful, even emotional. Lena was shocked when she found out. "You posted it?" she asked him, half angry, half amazed. He smiled. "Guilty, but look at the comments. They love it." She scrolled through them, her heart racing. It was strange reading strangers' words about something so personal, but it also made her feel alive. Like maybe her music still had a place in the world. That night when she got home, she told her mother about it. Her mother smiled proudly, tears filling her eyes. "See? I told you music would find its way back to you," she said softly. Lena hugged her, whispering, "Maybe you were right." The next Saturday, when she arrived at the hotel, something felt different. There were flowers in the corner of the hall and the lights were dimmed just right. Ethan was waiting as usual, but this time he looked more serious. "I have news," he said. "Someone from a charity concert saw your video online. They want you to play next month." Lena stared at him. Play? Like, in front of people? He nodded. Yes, a real audience. It's for a good cause, and it'll help raise money for families like yours. It's a small event, but it's a start. Her stomach twisted in fear. I can't. I'm not ready. I'll mess up. Ethan shook his head. You won't. You already played in front of a crowd once, and you silenced an entire hall. She looked at him, unsure whether to laugh or cry. That was different, maybe, he said gently. But this time, they'll be there to listen. That night, she couldn't sleep. The thought of standing in front of an audience again scared her, but somewhere inside she wanted to try. Maybe it was time. Maybe that song wasn't meant to be played just once in her life. As she lay in bed, she thought about how far she had come from that night when he dared her. What started as a moment of embarrassment had turned into something she never expected, another chance. And though the future still frightened her, one thing was clear. Her music had found its way back to her, and it wasn't letting go. The days leading up to the charity concert passed faster than Lena expected. Every evening after work, she practiced in the hotel music hall. The soft sound of her piano filled the empty space while Ethan sat quietly in the corner, pretending to check his phone but really listening to every note. Sometimes he gave advice, other times he said nothing at all, but he was always there, and that made her feel less alone. Still, Lena couldn't stop the nerves building inside her. It had been years since she'd played for anyone, and this time it wouldn't be a few guests in a ballroom, it would be a real audience. People would be watching, recording, judging. Every time she thought about it, her stomach tightened. One evening, while she was practicing, her hands froze mid-song. I can't do this, she said suddenly, shaking her head. I'm not ready. Ethan looked up. What makes you think that? I'm not a performer, she said softly. I'm just a waitress who plays sometimes. People will laugh. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. No one's going to laugh. You've already done the hard part. What's that? She asked. Believing that you have nothing worth showing, he said. You proved yourself wrong the night you sat at that piano. Now it's just about sharing what's already inside you. Lena looked down at the keys. You make it sound easy. He smiled gently. It's not, but I know you can do it. She wanted to believe him, but fear has a way of whispering louder than hope. She went home that night feeling torn between excitement and panic. The following week, her mother's health took a small turn for the better. The new treatments were working and the doctors were hopeful. When Lena visited the hospital, she told her mother about the concert. Her mother's eyes brightened immediately. That's wonderful, sweetheart, she said. You're finally going to play again. I don't know if I can, Lena admitted. I get scared just thinking about it. Her mother squeezed her hand. When you sit at that piano, don't think about fear. Think about me. Think about all those nights you played for me when I couldn't sleep. You didn't play for applause then? You played because it made us both feel alive. Lena smiled faintly. I'll try. The day of the concert came faster than she imagined. The event was small compared to the gala, but it was still elegant. It was held in a cozy theater with velvet curtains and golden lights that cast a warm glow across the stage. The audience was filled with donors, families, and a few familiar faces from Ethan's world. Everyone was dressed nicely, holding programs that listed the evening's performers. Backstage, Lena sat quietly on a wooden chair, her hands folded in her lap. She could hear the faint murmur of the audience on the other side of the curtain. Her name was printed neatly on the schedule. Lena Rivers, original piano piece. Hope. She stared at it for a long moment. The word hope felt heavier now than when she'd first written it. Ethan appeared beside her, dressed in a simple black suit. Ready? He asked. I don't think I'll ever be ready, she said honestly. He smiled. Then you're ready enough. She laughed softly, shaking her head. That doesn't make sense. It will, he said. Trust me. When the stage manager called her name, her heart nearly stopped. The sound of applause filled her ears as she stepped out under the lights. The stage seemed enormous, the piano gleaming like a mirror. She could barely see the audience through the brightness, but she could feel them, hundreds of eyes waiting, listening. She took a deep breath, sat down, and placed her hands on the keys. The first note came out shaky. So did the second. Her heart raced, her throat tight. For a moment, she thought about running off the stage. But then she remembered her mother's words. She closed her eyes and pictured her sitting by the window, smiling the way she used to when Lena played at home. Her hands began to move again, slowly at first, then more freely. The melody of hope filled the hall, gentle and warm like sunlight through a curtain. Every note carried a piece of her heart. The nights she cried silently beside her mother's bed. The morning she went to work exhausted but determined. The moment she found her music again because of one unexpected dare. The hall grew quiet, the kind of quiet that feels alive, filled with breath and emotion. The sound of her piano wrapped around everyone there, soft but powerful. By the time she played the final note, her eyes were wet with tears she didn't even realize had fallen. For a second, there was silence. Then came the applause. Louder, longer, more real than anything she'd ever heard. She looked up, dazed, and saw people standing. Some were clapping, others wiping their eyes. And in the middle of it all, Ethan stood too, smiling, not the confident grin she'd first known, but something softer, prouder. After the concert, people came up to her one by one, shaking her hand, telling her how moved they were. She smiled and thanked them, still feeling like she was floating somewhere between dream and reality. When the crowd thinned, she found Ethan waiting near the stage. "You did it," he said quietly. Lena laughed, a little breathless. "I did. More than that," he said. "You reminded everyone why music matters." She looked at him, uncertain how to respond. "I don't know how to thank you for everything." "You already did," he said. "You played." That night they walked outside together. The air was cool and the city lights shimmered in the distance. For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Lena said, "When you dared me that night, I thought you were just trying to make fun of me." Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe I was a little. I used to think moments like that were entertainment. But you taught me something." "What's that?" she asked. "That sometimes people you least expect can remind you what life feels like." Lena looked up at the stars, a small smile forming on her lips. "And sometimes," she said, "life surprises you when you think it's done giving surprises." Ethan chuckled. "That's true." They reached the edge of the theater steps. "What will you do now?" he asked. She shrugged softly. "Go home, take care of my mom." "Keep playing, I guess," he nodded. "You should. I have a feeling this isn't the last stage you'll play on." Lena smiled. "We'll see." When she got home that night, her mother was awake, waiting on the couch with the television playing softly in the background. "How did it go?" she asked eagerly. Lena sat beside her, smiling through tears. "It was beautiful, Mom. I wish you could have been there." Her mother reached for her hand. "I was," she said softly. "Right here." They sat in silence for a while, just holding hands. Lena realized then that all the fear she'd carried for years was slowly melting away. The music had given her strength again, not because it made her famous, but because it made her feel whole. In the weeks that followed, small opportunities began to appear. Local cafes invited her to play. A charity group asked her to perform at their fundraiser. People who had heard her song online reached out with messages of support. It all felt surreal, but also right. Ethan continued to help behind the scenes, arranging things quietly without ever taking credit. He didn't try to control her career or make promises. He just encouraged her to keep going. They met often, sometimes to talk about music, other times just to sit in comfortable silence. One evening, as they sat in the hotel hall again, Ethan said, "Do you ever think about how one small choice changes everything?" She smiled. "Every day," he nodded. "I used to believe success was about power. Now I think it's about moments like this, real ones." Lena looked at him. "You changed too, didn't you?" He thought for a second, then smiled. "Maybe you reminded me how to listen." The piano sat quietly between them, shining under the soft lights. Lena reached out and pressed a few keys, the gentle sound echoing through the empty room. She looked up and said, "Do you want to hear something new I've been working on?" Ethan smiled. "I'd like that." As she played, he closed his eyes again, letting the notes wash over him. The melody was calm, hopeful, alive. It wasn't just a song anymore, it was a story. Their story. The story of a moment that began with a dare and grew into something no one could have predicted. And as the final note lingered in the quiet hall, they both knew that night was not an ending. It was another beginning. Weeks turned into months, and life began to change in quiet, beautiful ways for Lena. The night of the concert had opened doors she never even knew existed. People started to recognize her not as the quiet waitress who worked at the hotel, but as the young woman who played the song that silenced a room. Her story spread quickly, shared online by guests who had been there that night. The video of her performance was posted on social media, and within days, it had been watched by thousands of people. Messages poured in from strangers all over the world. People who said her music made them cry, who said they felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. Lena read every message, amazed that something so personal could touch so many hearts. But even as her name began to spread, Lena stayed grounded. She still worked part-time at the hotel, still took the bus home, still made soup for her mother every evening. She didn't want to lose the simplicity of her life, even if success was knocking softly at her door. Ethan, too, changed in small ways. He no longer hosted loud parties just to show off his wealth. Instead, he spent more time on quiet projects, funding schools, supporting young artists, helping hospitals. He told himself it was just business, but deep down, he knew it was because of Lena. Her courage had reminded him that kindness could be louder than money. One morning, while Lena was serving coffee in the hotel cafe, Ethan walked in unannounced. He looked less like the billionaire who once filled rooms with attention, and more like a man who had found a bit of peace. He smiled as he approached her. "I need to talk to you," he said. She smiled back, wiping her hands on her apron. "About what?" He placed a small envelope on the counter. "An invitation?" She looked at it curiously. Inside was a letter written in elegant handwriting. It was an invitation to play at a private event, a music showcase featuring rising talents from around the country. The event would be held in the capital, with producers, journalists, and musicians attending. Lena looked up, wide-eyed. This is huge. But how did I get invited?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe someone sent them your video." Her eyes softened. "You?" He shrugged. "I might have mentioned your name." Lena laughed quietly, shaking her head. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. "But I wanted to. You deserve this chance." For a long moment, she just stared at the letter. It was an opportunity she had only ever dreamed of, but it also meant stepping far outside her comfort zone. "I don't know," she said softly. "It's so far away and there'll be real musicians there." "You are a real musician," Ethan said firmly. "Don't ever forget that." That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She kept the letter on her bedside table, reading it over and over again. Fear whispered all the old things. "It's too big, you're not ready, you'll fail." But another voice, softer but stronger, told her she had to try. So she said yes. The weeks leading up to the event were filled with preparation. She practiced every day, sometimes until her fingers ached. Ethan checked in often, offering encouragement but never pressure. He made sure her mother had everything she needed while Lena focused on her music. Slowly, the excitement began to replace her fear. When the day finally came, Lena packed her small bag and took the early morning train to the capital. She watched the sunrise through the window, her heart racing with a mix of nerves and hope. The city looked enormous when she arrived. Tall buildings, crowded streets, people rushing everywhere. It was overwhelming, but also thrilling. At the venue, a large hall with shining floors and tall glass windows, she met other young musicians. Some were singers, others violinists or guitarists. Everyone seemed confident, busy rehearsing and tuning instruments. Lena felt out of place for a moment, standing there in her simple dress, holding her music sheets. But when she touched the piano during sound check, all her doubts quieted. The familiar feel of the keys grounded her. It didn't matter where she was, the piano was home. The evening arrived quickly. The audience filled the seats and the lights dimmed as the first performer walked onto the stage. One by one, musicians shared their songs, each receiving warm applause. Lena was the last to perform. Backstage, her hands trembled. She thought of her mother watching from home, probably sitting by the TV with her heart full of pride. She thought of Ethan, who had believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. And she thought of the girl she used to be, the one who served drinks in silence, afraid to dream. When her name was called, she stepped out slowly. The stage lights were bright again, but this time she didn't let them scare her. She sat down, closed her eyes, and began to play. Her song was new, something she had written just for this night. It was softer than hope, but deeper with more feeling. It was a song about finding courage, about small beginnings and second chances. As the melody filled the room, the audience leaned in, listening to every note. Halfway through, Lena opened her eyes and saw people watching quietly, their faces calm and thoughtful. There were no whispers, no distractions, just music and hearts listening. It reminded her of that first night at the gala, when everything changed. But this time she wasn't afraid. She was exactly where she was meant to be. When she finished, the silence stretched for a long moment. Then came the applause, soft at first, then building until the entire hall was standing. She smiled through tears, bowing her head as flashes from cameras flickered in the crowd. It was more than applause, it was acceptance. After the show, several people approached her. A music producer offered to help her record her own album. A local radio station wanted to feature her story. It all felt surreal, like stepping into a dream she didn't know she had permission to dream. Later that night, Ethan called. "How did it go?" he asked. She laughed softly, trying not to cry. "I think it went really well." "I knew it would," he said warmly. "You did what you were born to do." "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." "You don't owe me anything," he replied. "Just promise me one thing, keep playing. Don't let fear ever silence you again. I promise." When she returned home, her mother hugged her tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she said, tears in her eyes. "You've come so far," Lena smiled. "I just followed the music," her mother nodded. "And look where it led you." Over the next few weeks, Lena's story spread further. The performance from the showcase was shared online, reaching millions. People began calling her the girl who brought emotion back to music. She was invited to play at small concerts and charity events across the country. But no matter how far she went, she never forgot where it began, the night a billionaire dared her to play. Ethan continued to support her from a distance. He never asked for recognition or credit. When they spoke, their conversations were simple, about music, about life, about what mattered most. One day, during a quiet phone call, he said, "You've changed how I see the world." "How so?" she asked. "I used to think people were either lucky or not," he said. "But now I think everyone has something special inside them. It just takes the right moment to let it out." Lena smiled softly. "I think you helped me find mine, and you helped me remember mine," he said. As time passed, Lena recorded her first album, titled "The Song That Changed Everything." She dedicated it to her mother and to the man who gave her a second chance. Every track told a part of her story, the fear, the hope, the quiet strength that had carried her through. The album wasn't just music. It was a reflection of her journey from a forgotten corner of a luxury hall to the hearts of millions. The night the album was released, Lena stood on a small stage in her hometown, playing for a crowd of friends, family, and strangers who had come to see her. It wasn't a grand concert hall this time. It was a community center, simple and warm. But when she played, the same magic filled the air. The same silence, the same emotion, the same truth. And somewhere in the back of the room, Ethan stood quietly, smiling. He didn't want to be seen or thanked. Watching her play was enough. That night, after the final note faded, Lena looked up and whispered to herself. It all started with a dare. She smiled softly, her eyes glistening. And it became a dream. Years passed quietly but beautifully for Lena. Her name had become known in circles she never dreamed of, yet she remained the same gentle, humble soul who once carried trays across the luxury hall. The world called her a rising star, but to her, she was still just someone who loved the sound of piano keys more than anything else. Her music career grew steadily, not because of fame, but because people connected with her heart. Each performance felt like a conversation, each note like a piece of her life shared with the world. And through it all, she carried one truth deep inside. Kindness had built her path, not luck. Her mother's health improved over time. She was walking again, her smile brighter than ever. They had moved to a small house by the sea, where mornings began with the sound of waves and evenings ended with music drifting through open windows. It was the kind of peace Lena had once only imagined during her hardest days. Ethan remained a quiet presence in her life. They spoke often, but rarely about business or success. Their conversations were about life, how quickly it changes, how precious every small moment is. He still lived in the city, managing his companies, but his world had softened too. The man who once measured life in profit now measured it in meaning. One spring afternoon, Lena received a letter in the mail. It was from the same theater where she had once played her first big concert. They wanted her to perform again, this time as the closing act of a special event, an anniversary gala celebrating young musicians who had followed in her footsteps. The idea made her heart swell. It felt like a full circle moment, a return to where it all began. She immediately called Ethan. "Guess what?" she said, her voice full of excitement. "They want me to play again at the same place where it all started." "That's perfect," he said with a warm laugh. "You have to do it. You'll inspire a whole new group of dreamers." "I hope so," she said softly. "But you have to come. Promise me you'll be there." "I wouldn't miss it," he said. The days before the performance were filled with emotion. Lena spent hours practicing, not because she wanted perfection, but because she wanted every note to tell a story. She decided to play a new piece she had written called Home. It was about the journey, how people and places can change, but the heart always remembers where it began. When the night finally arrived, the theater was packed. Lights shimmered across the ceiling, and the same golden glow she remembered from years ago filled the room. But this time she wasn't a frightened waitress standing at the edge of a dare. She was the artist everyone had come to hear. Backstage, she took a moment to breathe, her hands resting lightly on the piano before she stepped out. She thought about all the moments that had brought her here, the challenge, the applause, the fear, the hope. Every memory felt like a note in her melody. When the curtain rose, she stepped into the light. The crowd erupted in applause before she even played a note. Somewhere in the audience, she saw Ethan sitting in the front row, his expression proud and peaceful. She sat down, closed her eyes, and began to play. Home was unlike any song she had ever written. It began softly, like a memory waking up, then grew warmer and fuller with each passing phrase. It carried the feeling of nights spent dreaming, of quiet strength, of gratitude for the people who never stopped believing in her. The music seemed to breathe on its own, and the audience followed every sound, every pause, every heartbeat within it. As she played, Lena thought of her mother, of their little seaside home, of the smell of coffee in the morning and the laughter that had filled their small kitchen. She thought of the moment a stranger had dared her to play a song in front of a crowd, and how that one act of courage had rewritten both of their lives. When the final note faded, the silence in the hall was complete. Not a single person moved. And then, like a wave breaking, the applause began. People stood, clapping and cheering, some even wiping their eyes. The standing ovation seemed to go on forever. Lena stood and bowed deeply. When she looked up again, she saw Ethan on his feet, clapping harder than anyone. Their eyes met across the room, and for a brief moment the noise faded and it felt like time had paused. She smiled, and he nodded slightly, as if to say, "You did it." After the performance, she met him backstage. He smiled as she walked toward him. "That was beyond beautiful," he said softly. "You've come so far, Lena." She laughed quietly. "And to think it all started because you dared me to play." He chuckled. "I didn't know that dare would come back to change me too." They sat together for a while in the empty hall, the echoes of applause still hanging faintly in the air. "You know," Ethan said after a long pause, "I used to think I had everything a person could want: money, power, success. But that night when you played, I realized I had nothing that really mattered." Lena looked at him, her eyes soft. "And now?" "Now," he said, smiling, "I think I've learned what matters most. Moments like this. People like you." She felt her heart warm at his words. "You gave me a chance," she said. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." "And you showed me what real courage looks like," he replied. "We both won." A few weeks later, Lena's performance video from that night spread everywhere. People called it the song that felt like home. It became more than just music. It became a story about finding purpose, about the magic that happens when kindness and courage meet. Journalists reached out to interview her, asking about her journey. But when they asked about the billionaire who had helped her, she always smiled and said, "He was just someone who reminded me that even small moments can change everything." She never said more, and that made the story even more powerful. Ethan didn't mind the silence. He didn't want fame from it. He was proud just knowing he had helped someone find her light. And in his own way, he had found peace. He began funding music scholarships for underprivileged students, naming the program the Hope Initiative. When asked why, he simply said, "Because everyone deserves a chance to be heard." Years later, Lena stood again in the same hall, this time not to perform, but to mentor young musicians. She sat beside nervous students, their hands trembling just like hers had once done. She smiled and said gently, "Don't think about the crowd. Play for the one person who believes in you. Sometimes that's all it takes." Among the audience that day sat Ethan, older now, but with the same kind smile. He watched quietly as she guided others, knowing that her kindness had multiplied far beyond what either of them had imagined that night long ago. After the event ended, Lena walked over to him. "You came?" she said warmly. "Of course," he replied. "I wanted to see what hope looks like now." She laughed softly. "It looks like nervous kids with big dreams, and a woman who never stopped believing," he said. They stood together for a moment, looking at the empty stage. "You know," she said, "sometimes I still hear that first song in my head, the one I played the night we met." "I remember every note," Ethan said. "It was the sound of truth." She smiled. "I guess music has a way of finding the truth in us." He nodded slowly. "It does." As the lights dimmed and the hall emptied, Lena walked to the piano one last time. She sat down, letting her fingers hover over the keys. Then, without a word, she played a quiet, gentle version of Hope, the same song that had silenced a luxury hall years ago, the same song that had started it all. Ethan listened quietly, his eyes glistening as the melody filled the air. When she finished, she looked up and they both smiled. "Still beautiful," he whispered. "Still true," she said. And in that soft, golden moment, everything felt complete. Two lives that had crossed by chance had changed each other forever. The billionaire who once mocked a waitress had learned humility, and the waitress who once feared the world had learned to shine. Their story became a quiet legend, passed on in whispers and shared through songs, a reminder that sometimes one small act of courage can echo through a lifetime. And as the last note faded, Lena smiled to herself, knowing that her music would live on, not because of fame or fortune, but because it was real, because it had come from the heart.